This morning, our focus will be on feed formulation. Basically, the knowledge we've had since the beginning of the module, understanding nutrient requirement of animals, why we feed animals, to their genetic potential, our knowledge of various feed ingredients. We will be putting them all together into one box in terms of the practical application, being able to combine maize, soybean meal, wheat bran, molasses, fish meal, any of those ingredients together in such a way that it meets the nutrient requirement of the animals. Beyond the knowledge of the nutritive value, there are other factors that come into play. For example, palatability. For example, there are certain thresholds that in terms of practical feed formulation, we have to consider. Things like cost, availability of feed ingredients, perishability. So all of those factors come into one box in determining what we combine to meet the animal's requirement. Some of our learning outcomes include understanding the process and limitations of feed formulation using spreadsheet. This morning we're going to be starting first by looking at how we can, in the previous class we talked about a simple Pearson square, where you can combine two ingredients to achieve a certain result. For example, if you want to mix, say, maize, or let me say, silage and barley in such a way to get a diet with a certain megajoule of energy, and barley and the silage have contrasting energy density in terms of metabolizable energy. How you can mix? You can go beyond two ingredients in double Pearson square, where you want to combine 3 ingredients or 4. Beyond 4 ingredients, it becomes difficult for you to use a simple Pearson square or the double Pearson square. You can proceed to use a spreadsheet like Excel, a Microsoft Excel application. On Microsoft Excel, you probably can work with 4, 5, 6 ingredients, probably more. But that in itself may also be challenging. And then we will proceed to testing a particular proprietary feed formulation software, and then we'll see how it actually works. What you're going to be doing this morning is exactly what happens in the industry. If you have to work as a nutritionist, a feed formulator for a feed company, the knowledge and the skill is just what is going to be built upon. But having the foundation and the basics becomes very important. So basically, when we're formulating feed for animals, the end sense is basically to formulate a diet of precise nutrient composition from raw materials of known nutritive value. Raw materials of known nutritive value, meaning the nutritive value of the raw materials we're going to be using, we have to know them. You see, when I was talking in the previous classes, what we have, that is the nutritive value of the ingredient that is available. The animal achieve an optimum level of performance at the best cost. If there is anything you would have appreciated by now, is that, for example, when you continue to increase nutrients to animals, maybe protein, probably the animal will continue to grow faster and faster. You reach a certain threshold. If you add more protein or more energy, it doesn't make any significant difference. And then you reach that tipping point, and then if you continue to add more protein, more energy, for example, or other nutrients, what you will get is that there is decline in productivity, which, of course, beyond this threshold, you are wasting resources, you are wasting, and of course, your animal is also retrogressing in terms of growth or their health and all of those things. So we want to achieve optimum level of performance at the best cost. Along the line, we'll get there. So the steps are basically, as we begin into the Excel spreadsheet exercise, what does the animal need? We're talking in terms of the absolute nutrient requirement, e.g. gram per day. For example, how many grams per day of protein does a broiler starter needs? How many grams of protein per day does a 40 kilogram growing pig needs? Having that knowledge, say for example, the animal needs, let me say 157 gram per day based on the body weight of the growing piglet. The other question would be, how much feed can the animal consume in a day? Remember when we were talking in terms of using ruminant animals as a case study in some of the previous classes, I told us we have to be able to quantify the dry matter intake when we're talking about the M over D. If your animal needs, for example, 207 megajoule of energy per day, and the animal cannot consume beyond 18 kg of dry matter, your M over D will be 207 divided by 18. That gives you an idea of what the diet should be in terms of energy, such that by the time the animal consumes 18 kg of that feed a day, that animal will have gotten the exact 207 megajoule of energy. What raw materials are available and what is their nutritional value. Calculate the rate of inclusion of the raw materials and their individual contributions. These are some of the things we're going to be looking at. So for example, step 1 to 3 will be described for a pig and a broiler diet. So using energy as a case study, we're looking at an animal that has a nutrient requirement of 120 megajoule ME per day. And our first focus will be to combine barley. Barley has 13 megajoule ME per kg dry matter. And silage. Silage has an ME of 10 megajoule. Mathematically, we can say represent barley and silage with B and S. 13B plus 10S must be combined in such a way to arrive at 120 megajoule. So what proportion of barley and silage must we combine? The truth of the matter is, if you solve this mathematically, there are various values of B that can give you an equivalent value of S that you can combine to get that result. So you do not have just one. For example, if you are feeding barley alone, that means barley, maybe say barley 100% barley, 0% silage. How much quantity of barley do you have to give to the animal to get 120 megajoule? Remember, barley has 13 megajoule, isn't it? 13 megajoule. If we feed 9.3 kg of barley to the animal, we're saying 1 kg of barley has 13 megajoule of energy. If we feed 9.23 kg, what quantity of energy will the animal get? We can do a cross multiplication. We can do a simple cross multiplication, and then you will get the same answer. Can we please punch a calculator? We will have 9.23 times 13 divided by 1. What answer do we get? 119.99 megajoule. And that is the first point of our that series of options. If we feed only silage, if we feed exactly 12 kg of silage, 1 kg of, let's say, silage has how many megajoule of energy? 10. By the time you feed 12 kg of silage, and you do the same cross multiplication, you will arrive at the same thing. So that means on the two extremes of that combination, you can feed either of the two ingredients to the animal to get 12 megajoule 120 megajoule of energy to meet the animal's need for the day. But when you decide to mix them, the more you add silage, the more you decrease the quantity of barley. Or the more you take out the silage, you have to replace with barley. And so you have an infinite number of possibilities in terms of how you mix barley and silage. If you take protein, for example, you have the similar scenario. And interestingly, if you represent it graphically, you will have something like this. So it therefore means if we are going to be combining two nutrients, we want to formulate or we want to combine barley and silage in such a way that it meets the energy requirement of the animal per day, and it also meeting the protein requirement of the animal for that particular day. We must pick a point where both combinations agree, and that's will be the point in which the two curves intersect each other. In practical feed formulation, we are looking beyond just to a nutrient. For example, for your growing pea, you want to be considering energy, you want to be considering protein. Lysine, for example, is the first limiting amino acid in pigs. You want to be sure that the animal's diet not only meets its protein requirement, but also meeting the amino acid requirement, primarily first lysine and maybe more. You want to be sure that the animal has enough calcium, phosphorus, and other minerals to meet its requirement. Remember, we said earlier on that the purpose of scientific feed formulation is basically to optimize the genetic potential of the animal. So every factor that can optimize that genetic potential has to be considered. So this, I'm going to pause this screen and we'll quickly open the Excel sheet, and then we will start and see what we can. By now you should have access to some of the Excel sheet on Moodle. Do you have this? Not yet? Not showing. You should have them now. I actually uploaded them on Moodle, but I think you will be able to see them barely around after 9 a.m. because I wanted us to be able to. You may want to scan this if you. Okay, you will be able to get this on Moodle maybe just now. So basically, for example, we want to look at this nutrient requirement, but I'm sure you will have access to this, right? Okay, so for example, the contribution of nutrients to the mixture by certain feedstuff depends on the percentage included and on the concentration of that nutrient in the feedstuff. The following formula applies: the percentage of the feedstuff included multiplied by the concentration of that nutrient in that feedstuff will give us the value of the contribution of that nutrient to the ration. So on this Excel sheet, you should have this access to this on Moodle now. Okay. In this particular example, we are working on a pig diet. The animal has a requirement of 13.6 . 13.6 Okay, the animal has a requirement of 13.6 digestible energy in terms of megajoule per kg, crude protein of 186 gram per kg, and lysine 10 gram per kg. You, of course, by now you know the conversion of gram per kg to percentage. These are the ingredients available: barley, wheat, maize, soybean meal, and fish meal. Like I said, the inclusion of any of these, for example, if I have 0.9 of barley, the total nutrient supplied by barley to this particular ration will be the concentration of barley in terms of energy, which is 13.34. Please, if you are confused, just signify at any particular point in time. Are you with me? Multiplied by the inclusion of 0.9. Bearing in mind that the total we will have here must be 1. You want everything to be standardized. So, for example, within the confines of 1, we can play around this that we have. If you key in these various levels, inclusion levels, for barley, for example, is 0.518, 0.199 for wheat, for maize is 0.080, everything adding up to 100, to 1, which of course you can actually translate to 100 anyway. And then 0.056. I probably made some mistake there. Okay, yeah. 0.147. So what you see here basically is that in total, to supply 13.6 or 13.7 megajoule digestible energy, barley inclusion, almost more than 50% of the diet is made up of barley. Barley is supplying 6.9 megajoule of energy, whereas wheat is supplying about 2.9, and the other ingredients are minor inclusion in terms of energy. Equally in terms of protein, of course, because barley is supplying a whole lot of, has a very high inclusion level, even though barley's crude protein content is quite low compared to fish meal, for example, or soybean meal. But because you are including barley up to about 51.8% of the diet, barley is supplying the bulk of or almost about 25% of the diet protein, about 54 gram, whereas wheat is supplying about 18 gram. And even though soybean meal has relatively low inclusion level, because it is a diet of very high concentration of protein, it is supplying 70 gram of protein to that mixture. And fish meal, very, very low inclusion level. But because it has a very high amount of protein concentration, it is still supplying about 35 gram of protein. So what you see is basically we have kind of replicated step 1, 2, 3. We calculate the rate of inclusion of the raw materials, of what they will contribute in terms of energy and nutrient to the final diet to get the required total. So as we look in terms of, for example, energy, we can look in terms of protein and in terms of lysine. However, in practical feed formulation, there are certain ingredients that regardless of what you add and how you vary other ingredients, they are included at a very fixed rate. For example, if I have to cook at home, regardless of whether I'm cooking maybe rice or I'm cooking beans or cowpea or any of the other food, there is a certain amount of salt I add to a certain quantity of food, isn't it? So for example, salt added to the diet of animals, we usually have a fixed amount of salt that is added into the diet. So we have ingredients that we call fixed ingredients. And then you have the others we call variable ingredients. So when you are beginning to have feed formulation in terms of using a whole retinue of nutrients or ingredients, you want to be sure whether these ingredients are fixed or they are variable. If the ingredients are fixed, then regardless of how you interchange what you had or the inclusion level of the other ingredient, you have to put those fixed ingredients into the diet or into the ration at a very fixed rate. So for example, usually in practical livestock feeding, premises that supply macronutrients and micronutrients and certain minerals are usually prepared and sold in packs. And also farmer just buy them, or the feed company buys them and add them to the diet of the animal at a fixed amount or at a fixed inclusion level. And that way you have to fix those nutrients constantly, regardless of what you do subsequently, whether you want to vary your maize or your wheat, your barley, your soybean, your fish meal, or any of the other ingredients. So if you go to, in the same Excel sheet we just worked on, if you go to with sheet number 2, can you see sheet number 2? Okay. Here we are going to be fixing vitamins and mineral premix at 0.03. What we are going to do now is that all of us, you are going to include barley, wheat, maize, fat blend, soybean meal, fish meal at varying proportions to meet this nutrient requirement of the animal. So basically what you are going to be doing is you want to formulate feed for these animals. The nutrient requirement of the animal is already established. You have the ingredient. The Excel sheet is already programmed, in such a way that as you vary, it automatically calculates. The program is basically, it's not something big. You will be able to do it. You see, as I click, you will see what was multiplied. So it is basically the content or the concentration of digestible energy in barley multiplied by whatever inclusion level you pick. And then it gives us the value of what nutrient barley will supply. As you change the proportions, what is supplied will change. And for protein as well, you will see it's indicated by those colors. Equally for lysine. So quickly, in 5 or less than 5 minutes, can you work and let us see what each and every one of us is able to come up with in terms of the nutrient, the inclusion levels you can have that will still give the meet that requirement of the animal. So by 9:29, Hope you're making some progress.
I'd like to catch up really quickly.
Yeah, please do. Is anybody stuck somewhere? Okay. Okay, I was still waiting for anybody. You want me to hold on? Please just signify. If not, we can proceed. Can we proceed?
Go for it. Don't ask me the questions.
No, you can work on the Excel. Please. Wait one more minute. Okay, here is what I have. I am 100% certain nobody has this. Like I said in the beginning, we can generate an infinite proportions, even working with 2 ingredients. In my own formula, I have 35% barley, 25% wheat, 13% maize, maybe 3% fat blend, 11% soybean meal, 0.1%, maybe 10% fish meal, and the fixed ingredient was the vitamin mineral premix, which was included at 3%. If you look at my formula, in terms of meeting the digestible energy requirement of the animal, I exceeded the requirement, isn't it? The requirement was 13.6. I formulated my diet to 13.9. So I have supplied excess energy. In terms of meeting the crude protein requirement of the animal, which was 186 gram crude protein per kg, my mixture gave me 187, which also exceeded the requirement. For lysine, I also exceeded. Instead of 10, I had 10.5 approximately. Yours may not have exceeded, or probably you didn't meet one of the requirements. It's possible. The goal of this particular exercise is actually not to meet all the requirements exactly as per se, but for you to be able to appreciate the fact that you can vary this ingredient in a way that you won't meet the requirement. I can vary those ingredients in another way, and I will still come close. If I sit down probably for extra 5 minutes, I probably may keep adjusting and adjusting and adjusting in such a way that I will come very close to 13.6, 186, and 10 for energy, protein, and specifically lysine. So that is the goal of this particular exercise, for you to be able to see how we can mix these ingredients together in infinite number of ways and get this. We are going to look at a second exercise, and I'm sure I will just save this for myself. There is a second Excel sheet which I think you should have. earlier on, when I was talking about the nutrient requirement of animals, you see, in the first exercise, the nutrient requirement was stated. Where do we get the nutrient requirement of animals from? Can somebody maybe help us? Where you want to know broiler, you got maybe 1,000 day-old chicks from a hatchery. Where, for example, you know what their nutrient requirement will be. You said? The birds? Yes, I'm talking of broiler chicken, birds. Where will you get information about the nutrient requirement of the animals? For your pig, for your cattle? AHDD.
Thank you. I knew it was something.
Yeah. Yeah. For example, the AHDD publishes, very good information with regards to nutrient values, with regards to nutrient requirements of animals. Where other source do you think you probably be able to get such information from?
Specialized websites, so that like farmers, like big farming productions.
Farmers associations. So, for example, if you look at specific breeds of animals, specific breeds of specific breeds of maybe pig, poultry, cow, those farmers, by virtue of their practice and data collection and scientific experimentation, they've been able to establish what the nutrient requirement of these animals should be. So, for example, maybe Drakensberg Breeders Association, that is a particular breed of cattle, a particular breed of beef cattle, for example. The association of farmers who rear that particular breed of cattle can publish information with regards to that. Nutrition textbooks, usually towards maybe at the back as appendices and whatever, can have that kind of information as well. Talking of breeding association, for example, many of the pigs and poultry species breeds, specific companies that are releasing the genetic lines have developed a whole lot of information database, and many of them, for example, are made freely available. For example, talking in terms of broilers, that's the meat type chickens that we rear, slaughter, and then we buy. If you go on the internet, for example, and you click on, I know, for example, if I give COP broiler management guide, this is something that's showing 2022, which is usually updated. See, if I click on this COP broiler management guide, the information I will have will be how I can rear this particular genetic line optimally. A whole lot of information with regards to several factors. And then as you move down, you will probably come across information with regards to nutrition. I know sometimes it's difficult to manage information overload. Temperature, stocking density, nutritional management. And then, there should be, I'm trying to see, but these are kind of sources where you will be able to lay hold. I'm trying to see if we can get a quick Okay, let me see feed guide, broiler performance and nutrition supplements. Yeah. Okay, yeah, see something like this. Performance objectives. With this, for example, is showing what the weight of your animal should be and the rate of growth per day. Weight for age, daily gain, average daily gain, cumulative feed conversion, daily feed consumption. Remember when I was using cow to make a description of M/D, what quantity of feed you expect that particular animal to consume at that particular age. That will give you an indication here. And how much of nutrient it needs to attain the optimal growth. That is exactly what is being shown here. And then, obviously, I expect to see, okay, nutritional recommendation. Here is saying broiler starter, the animal should be fed 180 gram averagely. If the animals are fed crumble diet, metabolizable energy is 12.45. In kilocalories is 2,975. If it is in kilocalories per pound, that's 1,349. Requirement for digestible lysine, methionine, tryptophan, threonine, arginine, valine, isoleucine, for calcium, for phosphorus, chloride, linolenic acid. You see, all of the information we talk in terms of nutrient requirement of the animal can be obtained in sources like this. And like I said earlier on, textbooks also have some of that kind of information. In the Excel sheet we earlier on worked with, you will notice that on the left column we had a small portion, here let me reopen the Excel sheet. Here we had the nutritional value of the raw materials on this corner of the Excel sheet. And then here we basically had our requirement, animal requirement section. And then this became our working area where we formulate the diet. For example, on this Excel sheet, I probably may want to have more visual interface. I want to see to what extent my diet has been able to meet the requirement. So for example, I can introduce something like around some simple calculations. I want to have on percentage. What this has shown me is basically that my diet has exceeded the 100% requirement of the animal by 102, by 100, and by 104. You get? That can help me in terms of easy understanding of what my 13.9 is in comparison to my 13.6. If I choose, I can go a step further on Excel, and I want to have charts with it. Remember, this becomes very valuable. For example, if you are having maybe, I'm just manipulating the Excel sheet now. And you have something like this, and you see how well you are faring. You have been able to meet the lysine requirement of the animal. You've exceeded it up to well over 1.102%. Whereas your crude protein is sitting somewhere below 98%. Whereas the energy requirement of the animal is, well, maybe 100. Let's even say this is a 0.63. The energy requirement of the animal was met 100%, or at least, yes, nearly 100%. Whereas you have met or exceeded the lysine requirement and you have not met the crude protein requirement of the animal. This particular type of diet, if this is a typical diet you feed to your animals, maybe your peak. What do you think is the implication of this kind of diet? Based on some of the things we have talked about in some of the previous classes. You see some of these things as we interact, they just unfold. What do you think will be the implication of this type of diet? If you feed this diet to your peak? The diet is able to meet energy requirement 100%. The crude protein requirement is not met, even though lysine requirement was met or even exceeded. What do you think will be the response you will get if you feed this type of diet to your animal? Yeah, not good one. How bad is it?
Got too much lysine in its diet and not enough protein, good protein.
Okay.
So will there be health implications?
Health implications, okay. What health implications? I'm not easily satisfied. I want more. I want more. Give me more, please. What do you think will be the implication of this type of diet? Please make a try. We need the same in the class. A rapid decline in growth. How? Okay, well, theoretically you're right, but in practical sense, I'm not sure that is exactly what will happen. Any other try? First, with monogastric animals, the animal eats to satisfy its energy requirement. The implication is that this particular diet, in terms of energy, it is just enough to meet the animal's energy requirement. However, it is not meeting the animal's protein requirement, isn't it? So the implication of that is, by the time the animal eats, let's assume this animal is supposed to eat 1 kg of feed a day. This particular pig is supposed to eat 1 kg of feed a day. By the time the animal eats 1 kg, it gets 100% energy for its energy need. And it's only getting 97.5 or 97.8 of its protein requirement. Meaning they are to build tissue, which is what protein is needed for, isn't it? It's not met 100%. However, where this particular story or this particular scenario becomes interesting is that we have a little bit of excess lysine. Does the animal really need protein as protein? What the animal needs is actually the amino acids.
I was just about to say the amino acids.
The animal absorbs amino acid from the intestine and uses it to assemble its own protein. Technically, the excess lysine can be broken down.
I was just going to say, I've just read an article which says that pigs prefer diets with excess lysine in them because it helps them with the amino acids, and that's that if they're given a choice between lower lysine and higher lysine, pigs will go for lysine. That's got more lysine in it.
Yes, because lysine is the first limiting amino acid. How well is able to aggregate other amino acids is dependent on the availability of lysine. Let us compare another scenario where we have protein 105 and energy 95. What do you think will happen? Maybe let me just manipulate these figures here. Okay, if we have this kind of it's still even mild. If we have this kind of diet, what do you think will happen? What will be the implication of this type of diet?
It doesn't have enough lysine to process the food protein.
Yeah, but lysine is almost 100%. It's well beyond 99%. Almost
But because the crude protein is slightly over, and pigs require excess lysine.
You are trying to pick hole in my arrow, and I'm going to correct that. Oh yes. Now tell me,
Shut up now.
guys, what do you think will happen to the animal with this kind of diet? You can. Just give it some try. Because I said earlier on that the animal eats to satisfy primarily its energy requirements. The animal was supposed to eat 1 kg of the diet to satisfy its energy requirements. By the time the animal consumes 1 kg, the energy requirement is not met. What will happen is that the animal will eat more. The animal will eat more than the 1 kg. And by the time the animal consumes more than the 1 kg, I said, assuming 1 kg was the theoretical quantity of feed that the animal needed. The animal will consume more in that particular instant. And by the time the animal consumes more, what happens to protein and lysine? The animal will get excess of protein and lysine. And that becomes a waste because you are basically supplying more protein than what the animal needs. So you will see that the proportion of the various nutrients have a relationship with each other. So for example, there's what we call the energy protein ratio. Even if you supply protein to 100% and the energy is not adequate, you will end up wasting the excess of the protein. If you supply excess energy and protein is deficient, particularly lysine deficient, the animal will aggregate amino acids to the level of availability of protein and lysine, and the excess of the energy becomes a waste. And what does the animal do with the excess of the energy? What does the animal do with the excess of the energy? What happens when we consume excess energy as humans, for example? Yeah. We get fat. So, what happens basically is that your animal will begin to accumulate fat. And the more fat the animal accumulates, the more energy it needs to meet its maintenance requirement. It becomes a cyclic thing. For humans to break that cycle, what do? We go into the gym and we begin to do all of the exercises to shed the excess fat. So you see how these nutrients play with each other. So in the second Excel sheet, what I did is on the sheet, I labeled the first sheet as practice broiler diet. You see, I have included maize, soybean meal, wheat, soybean oil, methionine, L-lysine, monocalcium phosphate, salt, and premix as candidate feed that we can mix to meet the nutrient requirement of these particular animals. If you go to sheet number 2, the same all the various candidate ingredients that is available, well, as far as my database is concerned, I try to populate them in terms of dry matter, available metabolizable energy. I express the available metabolizable energy in both kilocalories and megajoules. I had this Excel sheet in kilocalories earlier on, so I just added megajoule. Crude protein, percentage, lysine, methionine plus cysteine, ethyl extract, crude fiber, calcium, and phosphorus. You see, we are now beginning to compare more nutrients than what we compared earlier on. By the time we want to try this on Excel, it's going to take us more time. And you have all the nutrients content. And then I try to get prices. Obviously, these prices are not up to date. These prices are not up to date. There's been a whole lot of happenings around the global trade of nutrient ingredients in the last couple of months. So most of these prices are maybe well above this now, maybe except a few. I think I still checked the soybean meal over the weekend, and the price was still something not so far away from 0.39 per kg, 0.39 pound per kg. Equally, by the time you now begin to, if you reflect back on the first exercise we had, if you look at, for example, wheat and maize, their nutrient content is very close. And then you want to ask yourself, which of them should I add more? And that is where the question of cost comes in. Which is cheaper? So, for example, I added a column that had the prices of the various ingredients. The prices change. You just had a rumor that Vladimir Putin has signed a peace deal with Ukraine. And so all the wheat grains harvested and locked down in Rhodesia or whatever is going to be released. And then the price of wheat come crashing. Meanwhile, in the last few months, you've been formulating your feed using only maize because of the high price of wheat. Now that the price of wheat is coming down, what do? You go back to your feed formula, you can adjust or compare. If the price of wheat gets to this level, what inclusion level can I use that will give me a better feed or a cheaper feed, still meeting the requirement of my animals? Now, for every ingredient that you think in terms of price, what is that value? If you look at the very last column, I have price per megajoule of energy. For example, in this particular instance, maize was the cheapest ingredient in terms of price per megajoule of energy, followed by wheat. And then you have rice bran, soybean oil, wheat bran, palm kernel meal, and all of that. In the last sheet, price per percentage of crude protein. You see, if we want to use spreadsheet, it can be, we can have a whole class working on spreadsheet alone. But I just wanted to show you, to what extent spreadsheet can be used And then of course, obviously it has its limitation. So for example, you can take this home, for example, and try to, add this ingredient and see what you are able to get and what the price of your feed will be. If we had all the luxury of time, we could just set ourselves up and see who can formulate the cheapest feed in the class. We have the ingredient, we have the prices, we can take it as an exercise. Who can formulate the cheapest feed in the class? And then maybe the person we walk home with, we can carve a small wall cup for the person. So quickly, because of our time, we will just leave the Excel spreadsheet. So the question is, what are likely challenges with the spreadsheet exercise? The first thing you would agree with me is that it's going to be time consuming. It's going to take time before you can sit down and begin to fine tune it. You want to arrive at your 186 gram of protein. Of course, when I did mine, I exceeded all the nutrients. So it's basically not perfect. Time consuming because we have to play around, try and error. Oh, I put 0.15, I change it to 0.147 and all of that. The more nutrients you add, the more complicated it becomes. The more ingredients as well you add, the more complicated it becomes. You see the second exercise that I just shared with us. You want to now begin to consider the diet of the animal in terms of energy, in terms of protein, in terms of lysine, methionine plus cysteine, in terms of ethyl extract, in terms of crude fiber, in terms of calcium, in terms of phosphorus. 9 nutrients. Meanwhile, 9 nutrients is just 9 out of several nutrients that you may want to consider. Again, bearing in mind that there are certain nutrients that you can have a maximum of. For example, nutrient like ethyl extract, that's fat. Many of the fat, does the animal have a specific ethyl extract? You want to be sure that you are not exceeding a certain threshold. For example, with dairy feed, you want to be sure that the diet of your animal does not have fat beyond 5% inclusion. So you set that as maximum. For your monogastric animals, you want to set a maximum for your crude fiber. Remember, they are not ruminant animals. So the more of that nutrient or those considerations you have, the more they become complicated. So it becomes very difficult for you to monitor all the various nutrient constraints. And of course, it becomes more difficult to balance all the nutrients at the same time. You add one, this angle, it distorts the other nutrient. And then of course, it becomes difficult to compare the relative cost of different raw materials. You want to compare the relative cost of taking out 1 kg of maize, putting 1.1 kg of wheat, or 1.3 kg of barley. Now, the price comparison you will do is pound per megajoule or pound per crude protein. You forgot that all of these 3 ingredients also have crude fiber, calcium, phosphorus, lysine, methionine concentration in them that will affect your ingredients. So, pound per unit of those nutrients, it becomes difficult for you to compare them all. And so, these are some of the constraints with regards to using the spreadsheet. The solution basically is linear programming. For example, some of us here probably have dexterity for software development, coding, and all of that. there are guys, young guys who probably never studied agriculture, who are beginning to look at linear programming and their coding technique in design apps that can formulate feed. So for example, on Google Play Store, you can type feed calculator, and then you come across a particular app that you can use to formulate feed. You probably have to buy maybe a token, maybe they have a free version that you can just try or something, and then you have to buy a voucher or code, you key it into it. The person who designed it is making money for you patronizing or using that particular app. So with the linear programming softwares, it basically embedded all of those constraints that we mentioned on the spreadsheet and optimize them. On the spreadsheet as well, it's possible for you to code and monitor certain things, but it's very complicated. So with the linear programming softwares, very rapid. At the click of a mouse, in a split of seconds, you can get your output. It provides solutions that is the diet that meets the defined requirement at the most economical cost. Bearing in mind that, for example, in monogastric production, pig and poultry, 75% of the cost of running the farm goes into feed. So to achieve this, we use specialized softwares. I'm not going to skip this. Remember, this was the mathematical expression we were working on earlier on. So basically, when you look at the point where energy and protein meet, he tries to look at what is, it brings in the cost factor into it, and the maximum nutrient intake of the animal. And then it establishes what the animal, what you can combine. So usually we say an ideal computer package must be able to formulate the diet based on specifications of the rations, key in all the nutrient constraints. I want a diet that has one that can give me 18.6% crude protein or 22%, that can give me this particular energy, that can give me a diet whose ether extract does not exceed 5%, crude fiber does not exceed 7%, calcium does not exceed so amount, it's not below so amount. And then it has to have a section for the raw database of ingredients. Remember that ingredient quality also changes. So sometimes some may have options where you can modify the quality of the ingredient. Oh, the maize I bought, the last batch, was poorer in protein than expected. So instead of getting 8.8% crude protein or 8.7, when I measured it in the lab, I got 8.5. And you're going to use that maize to formulate your feed. You will not mislead the computer package to rely on your 8.7 that the computer already knew. And then it prepares various inclusion levels to achieve the feed formulation, factoring least cost, what is feasible, and of course. So basically, that is what an ideal formulation software is. Quickly, we are going to try one or two exercises. The steps were already uploaded on Moodle as well. We are going to just check and see how fast or how far we can go and what type of diet, we are able to formulate. So for example, I can close this. So basically, for example, on the spreadsheet, if you are going to formulate feed using the spreadsheet, these are the basic steps you might want to consider to follow. But basically, the ultimate aim is to be able to include each of those ingredients in a way that they all add up to 100% or to a fraction of 1 and meet the requirement of the animal. So on the system, log on to the Windows as usual, go to the Start menu and select U of N Applications and WinFeed. So I'm going to do that. I have U of N Applications. And then I have my WinFeed software opened. So you should have something like this. So wait for the program to load and have a blue screen showing WinFeed 2.8. Click on Open Previously Saved Formula. For this class, I'm just going to open, you already have some of the WinFeed files. So for example, I'm going to open the 40 kg grower formula, and I have something like this. And now I want to set a whole lot of constraints. The test diet for pig has been set with a range of available raw materials of given nutritional value. Click on the feed store button, look like a building, and select off available ingredient. So here you can go to feed store. All the various ingredients are selected, and if you click here, you will go back. Go back to main menu. These are minimum nutrient requirements. Here you will see minimum, maximum, which we are not able to do with the spreadsheet. So for example, I can set my dry matter 85% minimum, dry matter per kg 0.85, meal equivalent 1.0, crude protein 17. So meaning I want to formulate a diet that has minimum 17% crude protein. Digestible energy 13.5. For this I will delete this 14 first. Crude fiber 2.5. Oil minimum 1.0. Lysine 1.05, methionine plus 16 0.52. Who knows why we usually have a requirement for methionine plus 16? Who knows why we usually have methionine plus 16? Any try? The two of them are sulfur-containing amino acids. And in the body can interconvert. So if the body has enough methionine, it can use it to generate cysteine. If it has enough cysteine, it can use it to generate methionine. And that's why we usually have their requirement together. Calcium 0.8. Phosphorus 0.6. Salt 0.3. Hash will leave at 0 and bulk at 1. Enter these values in the minimum column of the nutrient pane. set bulk to a maximum of 1. So bulk is minimum 1, maximum 1. Concentration of trace elements and vitamins set to a minimum of 1.25. Here it's not showing, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add trace So you see on this sheet, you can add ingredients, you can also add nutrients based on what you want to achieve, and then you can set those constraints. So back here, now I have trace mineral, minimum 1.25 and maximum 1.25. And then I can push the doorbell to formulate. Are you following me, guys? If everything goes well, it should formulate something for me. It said formula failed. Now, because prices had been included, what you have here will be the price of the ingredient based on what has been formulated. Let me say try again by changing constraints. So for example, I can note down my price, 16204 per bag. This should be in, I think it should be in pence, if I'm not mistaken here. And then we can go further by setting other constraints. The more constraints you set, because basically the first formula will give you what is most likely the cheapest you can get. For some nutrient, it will be exceeded. For example, protein, we said minimum 17. It is formulating something in the region of 26. So we can set, for example, limit fiber to 4.5 maximum. So for example, we can come in here and set fiber maximum of 4.5. We can set protein to say, do not formulate beyond 17.5% protein. Why do you think these limitations might be important? I already explained earlier on how the nutrient interactions work out. and what the implications can be on the animal. And so sometimes you want to force the computer to say, you know what, I know you can give me excess, but I don't want the excess. Just give me the exact. You know what, let me just I'm trying to figure out. Okay, yeah, it seems to be responding now. So having set our constraint, the price we're getting now, because we have constrained the formula, we are getting 16502. The price increased, isn't it? Because we are constraining. And the reason why we constrain the formula because of your knowledge of certain things. For example, in one of the files I sent earlier on, you will see towards the end of the formula, okay, these are just like nutrient levels in pig feed, maximum inclusion rate of feed ingredients in pig diet. Why you can actually tell the computer to say what? Maize, I can use maize as much as possible. But if I'm formulating feed for winner pigs, do not use wheat beyond 20%. And the reason is because even though wheat and maize have very close nutrient value, there are certain feed factors that come into play. One very common one that comes to my mind now is, for example, in fattener pigs, we do not feed them with high amount of maize because of there is this thing we call soft pork associated with high maize diet. The fat in the pork become very soft, such that when the pork is cooked, the bulk of the fat in the meat melts away, and there is high amount of cooking loss. For example, we don't usually feed, in fact, before the European Union placed a ban on the use of fish meal in feeding livestock, we do not feed fish meal to fattener pigs beyond 2 or 3%. And the reason is, there is what we call the fish taint. You know, fish meal, it smells, isn't it? By the time you feed the fish meal to your pigs, by the time the pork is cut and cooked, the meat is smelling fish. You don't want that. You get it? So that way, this doesn't have anything to do with the nutritive value now, but it has to do with many other factors like organoleptic characteristics and all, digester flow rate and all of that. I can say excitement because the snow is, which is a good thing, isn't it? Especially for somebody like me who came from a tropical country and I've never seen snow before. So I should be grinning from here to here. So like I was saying, you can actually, based on the understanding that, for example, this particular diet is to be fed to fattener pigs. I can tell the computer that do not use fish meal at all. From the feed store, I will remove fish meal. But because maybe, for example, fish meal has a high amount of crude protein, it contributes a lot of methionine and cysteine, I can limit the inclusion level to 1%. Even if fish meal is very cheap, or it easily meets the requirement of my animal by supplying methionine, the system will be forced to look for other ingredients that can do the job, even if it comes at a higher cost, as you can see here. The more constraints we introduce, the more the price will likely increase. So for example here, we see quite a number of ingredients. For example, soybean meal, sorghum, high tannin sorghum, do not feed them to winners at all. For fatteners, not more than 10%. Whereas for sows, you can use up to 20%. Soybean meal, do not use beyond 15% for winners, 30% for fatteners, and sows. Oil, soy oil, maximum inclusion 3%. All these maximum inclusion recommendations are like guides. If you are going to get the best result with your feed for your animals to experience optimal growth, you can follow these guidelines. You can set these maximum inclusion levels. You agree with me that these become very difficult to achieve if we were to be using the spreadsheet. So in the exercise we were looking at earlier on, exercise, so for example, exercise 3 and 4 is something you can play around with on your own and then just see what type of feed you get. The more constraints you introduce, the likely you are able to, get a feed that meets the requirement of the animal with varying cost. So for example, if we want to really do a serious brain tasking exercise, which obviously is not the aim, it's not one of our learning goals, we can use the WinFeed software to formulate feed and then go back and check the prices of those ingredients and then try to use those prices, put them on Excel and try to play around trying to do it manually and see how close we can get per kg of feed. So for example, while the WinFeed may be giving us something like around maybe 0.27 pound per kg of feed, with our spreadsheet, we probably may not be able to, after a laborious 1 hour of, with motivation, maybe with popcorn and hot chocolate, you probably may be able to get 0.28 or 285 or 29 per kg. And then you have to change formula maybe 5 times in a year, 6 times in a year. Why do you want to task yourself and be doing this when you can actually buy this software from the company? It already did the job for you. You simply just key in your choice of requirements, your constraints, which the Excel cannot do, and then you get a cheaper feed. So you see the justification for why the farmer would want to invest in subscribing to that kind of software, and why programmers, some of them have agricultural background, some don't. While it is or it remains, people tell us that tech is the new gold mine. While, for example, if you have a flair for tech, you might want to see what improvement can come into your own original app that never existed. Maybe introduce some new algorithms that can, get a better job. So basically, that is what our feed formulation activity is. I will leave you guys to 3 and 4 It's something you can just practice on your own and then see how, what type of feed or what type of the cost of the feed you are able to formulate based on the constraints that is available there. So like I said, certain ingredients, we can fix them. You can say minimum and maximum stay the same. Some, you set a maximum. For example, what nutrient are you likely to set a maximum? Inter-extract. Because, for example, monogastric feed, inter-extract, crude fiber, you don't want to get beyond certain threshold. If it were to be a ruminant diet, you could set minimum NDF, because if the NDF is not high enough, rumen acidosis will happen. The feed will just be like a monogastric feed. It will not have enough bulk, and then it becomes problematic to your animal. So I think because time, right? We are coming to the end of the class, isn't it? And I think if I'm not mistaken, this will probably be our last class for this module, isn't it? Except, so I'm going to pause the recording, and I want to appreciate you guys once again.